Hi everyone, a very good afternoon and welcome to the Straits Times webinar series for subscribers. The first one of the year with many more to come. I'm Karamjit Kaur, news editor at the Singapore desk, and I'll be hosting this session, taking over from my colleague Suen Chow, who's unfortunately a bit unwell. Now first, please let me apologize for starting a little late to accommodate a breaking news development on Ukraine. Today we're talking about a book that many of us in the SD newsroom worked on, myself included. It's called In This Together, Singapore's COVID-19 Story. With me are my panelists, my colleagues Sumiko Tan and Timothy Goh. Now Sumiko is ST's executive editor and she edited the book working with the team across the newsroom. Tim is our health correspondent and he wrote several sections, including a really interesting chapter on masks. We'll hear from them in a bit as soon as I get through a few things to note for those of you joining us on Zoom, including how you can participate. This webinar will last about 40 minutes. Those of you who submitted questions in advance, thank you so much. We'll try and address as many as we can. We're happy to continue to take more questions, so do send them over by clicking on the Q&A icon on your Zoom screen. Okay, let's get straight to the main event and find out a bit more about what it took to put the book together and what happened behind the scenes of Singapore's fight against COVID-19. Now, Sumiko, Tim, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start with you, Sumiko. Tell us, why did ST, want to do this book, and that too, during the pandemic?
Hi Karam, and hi everybody at home. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so there were basically two reasons, Karam, we wanted to do the book. The first was, if you remember in the early days, everybody was very fraught. The situation was so unknown. And when we did the press conferences, Tim included, we could see how people were working so very, very hard. So I thought that, why don't we pay tribute to the frontliners with something permanent like a book? And it leads to the second reason, because I was wondering what we journalists can do to also help in the fight. And I mean, we are not doctors or nurses or ambulance drivers. We are not going out to swab people and all, but we can tell stories and we can chronicle what was happening. So let's do that, that's our job, that's our contribution. Why did we do it during the pandemic? I thought that to be as authentic as we can be, we needed to do it as it was playing out. Because even now, if you think back to 2020, I'm sure our memories fade, it's very hard to know what exactly was happening. So something more contemporaneous, I thought would be more authentic.
Yeah. Really, Sumiko, I couldn't agree more with you. I think really hats off and kudos to all the healthcare workers who continue to do so much to serve us and help Singapore in this fight against the pandemic. But having been involved in this project myself, I have to say that working amid this very dynamic situation, today it's something, tomorrow it's something else. I think that for me had been a bit of a challenge. I don't know, Tim, what your thoughts are on this. I mean, you wrote several chapters yourself.
Yes, I mean it was tough. I'm not going to lie. It was challenging for several reasons. First of all, I think we all remember at the end of 2020 when we started doing the interviews, there was this sort of triumphant mood in the air. The people we were interviewing, we all had the sense that, well, 2020 was tough, but we've gone through it and let's look back and here's how we beat it. Right? And so we wrote all our stories with that sort of angle. And then come 2021, shortly before we were due to publish the book, Delta hit. And we had to go back and redo everything again, re-angle, re-interview, recheck. And this happened several times, every time we were ready, we prepared everything, something else would happen and we had to redo the whole process. So it was quite challenging to keep all the facts straight while constantly updating it with new information. At the same time, from a more personal point of view, I think when we were speaking to all these healthcare workers and ministers and survivors or family members of those who passed away from COVID, each time you could see how the developing situation was taking a toll on them, and as writers as well, it sort of takes an emotional or mental drain on you too. So these were some of the challenges we faced. Yeah,
I absolutely agree with you, but I think in hindsight, I'm so glad we did the book. I mean, it looks good. You have copies of the book here, so I'm really glad we did it. And I want to move now to highlight some of the chapters in the book. Let's start with the one on masks. They're so readily available these days, all kinds of shapes, sizes, colors. Some work better, others not so much. But you had a chapter that you wrote, The Global Hunt for masks. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, it's funny you should mention how memories fade, Sumiko, because now sitting here in 2022, masks are so abundant, you can buy them all shapes and sizes. But looking back to 2020 when it first started, I remember the mask rationing, in a sense, exercises, the mask distribution exercises. And in writing this chapter, I learned that there really was a lot that went on behind the scenes. It really was a hunt for masks, and quite a desperate one at that, because at the time, around the world, everyone was shutting borders, discontinuing supply agreements. So I spoke with ST Engineering and ST Logistics, who were two of the main bodies behind this drive for self-resilience. There was a lot, I can't go into all the details, but really they sent agents overseas on what I could honestly call secret missions, to go to night markets, to buy as many as they could, to go to factories and make sure they were still there. At the same time, the government was trying to keep a cool head at home and try to reassure people. So there's really a lot of drama that went on behind this simple mask that nowadays I think many of us take for granted.
Yeah, some really good, interesting insights and details. And I think, many people don't really know the amount of work that went on in the background. In hindsight, it's a good thing that all that work went on, because, I think even as we hope that some of the COVID-19 restrictions would be eased, the use of masks in indoor settings especially is probably going to stay with us for quite a while. Okay, I want to move to you now, Sumiko. You wrote a chapter, Inside the War Room. I mean, that sounds really dramatic and really exciting. What is this war room, and are there weapons and ammunition in this room?
Yes, I mean, when they started the MTF, of course, we were wondering where did they operate from. So we were, maybe imagining some dungeon sort of area that's really dark. So in the end, we found out where the war room was. So the war room is actually the Phoenix Boardroom in the Ministry of Home Affairs in Irrawaddy Road. It's actually a place that we have been to for briefings by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So it's on the 20th floor. It's just a very, very big conference room. It's dark and gloomy, and the blinds are like always down every time I've been there, although the views are really beautiful of the Thompson area. And there's this huge table that occupies, practically the whole room. So everyone is kind of like pushed, around the walls. So that was the war room, the COVID-19 war room. And I mean, it was interesting to know that this was the place where all the ministers trooped to. And when they had safe distancing, what we found out was that they had to split the team like everybody else. So there was another group that operated from a much smaller conference room, I think on the 15th floor. So, Karam, that was the war room.
Yeah, okay, so no weapons and all, but I think
no
quite
weapons, yeah.
dramatic, all the key decisions and all the late night deliberations. I think we were told some of those meetings went, way into the night.
Yes, and I think the war room was in the Ministry of Home Affairs, because there's this civil service group called the Home Front Crisis Executive Group, and it's always headed by the Permanent Secretary of the Home Affairs.
Right.
So maybe that's the reason it was at MHA.
Why perhaps they chose to have the HQ,
that's right,
so to speak, there. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, let's move to vaccination. That it's become so important now, especially given that the Omicron variant of this virus is it transmits a lot further and a lot faster than Delta. So, and some interesting bits in the chapter talking about how Singapore placed some early bets. Tell us a bit more about that, Tim.
Yes, well, I think one thing that a theme that runs consistently throughout all the chapters is, first of all, how much work went on behind the scenes, and secondly, how differently things could have gone. And I say that because now in 2022, vaccines are, again, almost a given in Singapore, right? But this is only possible because way back in March or April 2020, we actually started going out and placing bets, in a sense, on which vaccine candidates were going to be successful and which ones we had to order for Singapore. And there were three very important groups behind this, from HSA, and there was the Therapeutics and Vaccines group, and also the Planning group. And what they had to do is review a lot of scientific data very quickly, and then make I could even say, educated guess at which vaccines were going to be successful and which we should place advance orders on. Because Singapore being a very small country, we had to get our foot in the door very early on, I think. And it was only thanks to these advance bets or orders that we placed that we are now seeing fruition 1-2 years later, and a ready supply of vaccines. But at the time, I know there was a lot of tension and a lot of anxiety going on because it's a multi-million-dollar bet. You know, what if we make the wrong choice? So yeah, there was a lot of drama behind that as well.
So there's a lot of collaboration,
Yes.
I think, between the various agencies. You mentioned HSA, that HSA being the Health Sciences Authority within, you know, right. Okay, and really, indeed, we've come such a long way from that, haven't we? I mean, almost all of us now, you know, vaccinated, and, you know, a good number of us boosted as well, including a lot of children who are now unfortunately sort of falling prey to COVID-19. Okay, I want to move on and maybe ask a bit of a slightly more of a light-hearted question. You know, there's been a lot of curiosity, I think, you know, about the three co-chairs of the government's COVID-19 task force. So Ministers Gan Kim Yong, Minister Lawrence Wong, and Minister Ong Ye Kung. And, you know, in the early days, we heard about this so-called bromance between Minister Gan and Minister Lawrence Wong. This was before Minister Ong Ye Kung came in. So I want to ask you, Sumiko, I mean, because you would have met with all three, what sort of vibes did you get, and did we sort of ask them about this, you know, this relationship between the three of them?
Oh yeah, Karam, definitely. We took the chance to, we did individual interviews with the ministers, and it was very striking that when we spoke to Gan Kim Yong, he used the word enjoyable, you know, to describe working with Lawrence Wong. Then a few days later, we interviewed Lawrence Wong, and he used the word enjoyable as well. Okay. So we thought, you know,
discussed it.
No, I think they didn't discuss it, but you know, it was very telling. And if you watch the MTF press conferences, I think you would have observed the good, you know, vibes, body language between the two. Then later, when Mr. Ong became health minister, was it last year in around May, thereabouts? So I mean, I don't know if you felt, but maybe the vibes were a little bit different or not. So when we interviewed Mr. Ong for the book, we of course asked him what it was like, and he made a very interesting point. He used this analogy. He said that I was the booster to the 2 primary doses. Okay. So yeah, make what you want of that. But that was an interesting description.
That's a very appropriate analogy, and I think it's, you know, whether you want to call it bromance or whatever, I think it's really important, you know, 3 of them being the co-chairs of this really important task force, to be able to work together, and, you know, it's what, you know, what we talked about earlier, to be able to collaborate, to make some of these decisions that really, you know, affect all of us, you and me, and our audience as well. Okay, we're having a really good discussion here, but I do want to stop here for a bit, and I want to turn my focus to some of the questions that have come in from our readers. Thank you very much again, and you can still submit your questions if you wish to by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, let's go. We'll take the first question. This comes from Mr. Anuj Girotra. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I apologize if I didn't. The question goes like this: how did the lawmakers react when they learned their initial mistakes around no masking advisories and foreign worker dorms? Sumiko, maybe you take the one on the no masking advisory?
Yeah, Singapore's mask U-turn was something that we talked about quite a bit in the book, and we asked the ministers, of course, and they gave very interesting response. The thing was, I think a lot of the Singapore response to COVID was based on their previous experiences and brushes with viruses, like the Sars virus and then the H1N1. So if you remember, when Ministry of Health sent the very first press release on this new mysterious virus from Wuhan, they said that if people had a runny nose and if they were coughing, do wear a mask. So mask was in that very first press release. But in the weeks that followed, you know, that the message kind of hardened to people who were well, don't wear a mask. And I think there were reasons for it, right? One was, you know, how, you know, the virus reacted or behaved during the Sars outbreak. Another was also there was a run on masks, right? Everybody was, you know, desperate to get one, and there was a very big fear that the healthcare workers in Singapore would not have enough supply. And then also there was the World Health Organization, which made very clear in the early days that, you know, if you're well, don't wear a mask. And because if you were to wear it, it might give you a false sense of security. Yeah. But when the scientific evidence came that, you know, you could be asymptomatic and still be spreading it, I think the government very quickly changed changed tack and said, please wear a mask, you know. And when we spoke to the Prime Minister, he said, yes, perhaps in retrospect, they could have got people to wear a mask, even a cloth mask, whatever, early. And what was interesting was Mr. Gan, who was Health Minister, he was very upfront. He said that, yeah, I mean, if the evidence changes, assumptions change, then we change, and we don't have to be squeamish about it.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're addressing this, because I think I remember during the early days, some of our readers actually sort of suggested there was a bit of a flip-flop, or that there was an attempt to sort of hide information. But I think the point you made is a really valid one. It's really about need and urgency, and I think it was more important for the healthcare workers to be properly, protected, because they really are the frontliners, Okay, great. Tim, do you want to attempt to answer the question on foreign worker jobs? A bit more of a complicated issue here.
Yes, as you mentioned, migrant workers in dormitories is a slightly more complex issue than the mask, right? Mask was a one-off thing. For migrant workers, and we do feature this in the book, right? I think there were three main issues or criticisms that were raised. First of all was when the first case came out, why was action not taken sooner to tackle to look at the dorms as a risk area? Secondly, people asked, when you locked down the dormitories, why didn't you do it faster? And thirdly, after you did that, why were there cases of long queues for food? Why was there rubbish piling up, right? And so we spoke to quite a few interviewees for this book, and I think it all boils down to COVID being a relatively unknown virus at the time, right? So as Sumiko mentioned earlier, a lot of our early protocols were based on Sars. And so when the first case came out, SARS protocols were implemented at the dorms, right? Check for symptomatic people, take temperature, right? And we only found out much later on that, asymptomatic people can transmit it. So then they locked down the dorms, right? But by then, cases were already spreading. And after locking down the dorms, it was not an easy decision. We spoke with PM Lee. He said, you're essentially turning people's homes, right, living quarters, into a military type situation. It's a very difficult situation. And after you do that, then all these new issues arise. Long queues and trash piling up, because no one has ever done something like this before. There's no example to learn from. It's uncharted territory. But I mean, to the credit of the authorities, after this happened, they did set up teams, a joint task force, a set of fast teams. I think there was Project Dawn as well for mental health, to try and tackle these issues. Hindsight is 2020. Could more have been done faster? Perhaps, now looking back. But at the time, I think with the fog of war and not knowing much, they responded the best they could. And now moving forward, one thing that's come out of this is that future dormitories will at least be designed to new standards, so there'll be a relatively better set of living conditions for migrant workers, having learned from this experience. Yeah,
so I think really two key points there, right? So first, the fact that it was so challenging to get this done because of the living conditions, and I think they brought in the Singapore Armed Forces as well to sort of help to manage the situation. I think the second key point, which you also mentioned, Tim, is the fact that I guess if you want to look at a positive outcome, we are now thinking really seriously about how to improve the living conditions of migrant workers, and also to address some of the mental health issues that came up as a result of this pandemic. So I guess that's one good thing that kind of like came out of this. Now, you both talked about SARS, and that takes me quite nicely to the next question from our audience, and this comes from Mr. Ong Wee Keong, and his question is, what were the key lessons from SARS that have helped us to plan our specific measures to overcome COVID-19? Sumiko?
So after SARS, the Infectious Diseases Act was amended. So it put in place, measures that the authorities could roll out the next time there was a big outbreak. So I think they had things like safe distancing measures, closure of restaurants, etc. So these were put in place, which was very helpful. Right, and the other thing that was a consequence of SARS was the building of the NCID, the National Center for Infectious Diseases, in very near MHA actually, across the road. So, yes, so coincidentally, it was officially opened, I believe, in September 2019, just 3-4 months before we had this big enemy come to our shore. Yeah, so NCID was ready. So I think that was a very good consequence of SARS.
Right, so I guess we were a lot more prepared
Definitely.
For, you know...
Yes, and over the years, we built up a lot of scientific capability. So Tim was talking earlier about the vaccines and how we made early bets on vaccines. I think we had a great big body of scientific knowledge to help us make those decisions.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll be a lot more prepared now when disease X,
hopefully it doesn't come.
Yes.
Whatever it is, comes, and yes, we hope it never does, but we'll get to that when that happens. Okay, well, take one, another question here. This comes from Mr. YC Lin, and his question is, I'm going to give this to you, Tim.
All right.
What is the one thing we can do as citizens to help spread the right information?
Well, that's a really good question, actually. Especially nowadays, I think I'd say because we're dealing with a lot of misinformation, scams, fake news is I would say an endemic kind of thing. I'd say two main points. First of all, I think it's important to, when you receive new information, right, juicy information, as human beings, our nature wants us to, just pass it on, share with as many people as possible. But I advise, pausing, taking a look at it and thinking through, okay, where did this information come from, right? Maybe checking the source, fact-checking, even reading up a bit online. If you're not so tech-savvy, you could ask your kids, your grandkids to help you with that. Verifying the source and just pausing to reflect on what is there before passing it on. Secondly, if you do see misinformation, fake news being spread, don't just happily forward the message, but perhaps speak to the relative or whoever passed it on to you and say, hey, I don't think this is quite right, and here's why, and go on to a discussion with them about it. Even most importantly, you can verify and check your information with official sources as well. I guess ST has, we at the Straits Times have this Ask ST. You could write into us with, and we will help you with the fact checking as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to really just reiterate what Tim said. I think this, instinctive tendency to just forward things on, I think that's really been a problem. And, I think especially so among seniors, in some of the interviews that we've done, I think it's really just a matter of habit for seniors.
It's not malicious.
It's not. And, they actually think that they're helping, their family members because they see something and then, they sort of get a bit worried and they get a bit alarmed and they sort of feel that, I better just forward this so that I can save as many people as I can. And just to repeat again what Tim said, check against, good credible sources like the Straits
Times.
That's right. Okay, we're going to take some questions that just came in not too long ago from our audience who are with us via Zoom. Now, this one, what was the most inspirational personal encounters you had while writing the book? This comes from Mr. Richard Wee. I'm just going to give you a bit of time to think about this, and whoever has the answer, just feel free to just jump in. What was the most inspirational personal encounters you had while writing the book?
Okay, maybe I'll try. Well, maybe not inspirational, but the story that really, touched me was a story on this Chinese foreign worker who died, right? We had a few stories of people who passed away. So this guy was on a cruise ship, and his family back in China didn't even know he caught COVID because he told them that he was in quarantine. So, and he sent them selfies, of himself on the ship. And the next thing you know, he died. And his family was really at a loss. And there was this quote we ran from The Sun, which really touched me. And it said that, to you, he was just another foreign worker in your country. But to us, he was our father, a son. He was the pillar of the family. And it really brought home to me how, we can talk about COVID, we can write about COVID and the science and the vaccines and all, but ultimately it affects people, and people have died. And that was something that really struck me.
Yeah, I really sort of agree with you there, Sumiko. It's really about the people, the human interest stories that we write about. I think these are the stories that, really always resonate with readers. People feel for them, and they're so open sometimes in terms of giving to the people that they've left behind, and whether it's children or elderly parents, to sort of try and do their part to support them. Okay, Tim, anything that you might want to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, thanks for that, Sumiko. I totally agree with you. I think nowadays, with case numbers so high, it's easy to get desensitized to the hundreds of people who are falling ill or in ICU or passing away. But in speaking with some of the survivors or the members of the family, it really shows how hard COVID can cut into our personal lives. I think on a slightly brighter note, I was really inspired by this story that my colleague Joyce did. It was called, it took 24 people to save Madam Tan, or Madam Tan's life, yes. And it's a story of how, nowadays home recovery, you get COVID, generally speaking, you just rest at home for a few days. But in the early days, when people got it, it was really scary. And just reading, it's about how this team of 24 people tried their best to help this patient from the Safa Jurong cluster recover. And this was in the early days when people were not vaccinated. So it hit her really hard, and she was really struggling to breathe, to live, to even deal with hallucinations and all. And just reading about all the work and effort that came into just helping one person get through this, it was really inspiring. So shout out to all the healthcare workers out there. I think that they're doing an amazing job. Yeah.
So 24 people, that's like doctors and nurses and all the various people within
housekeeping staff.
Yes,
that's true. I think we don't always talk about them, but the people who really in the background, I mean, we talk about nurses and doctors, and obviously they deserve all the credit, but the people who do like the laundry washing and the cleaning, and the people who dispose of all this, test kits and whatever other equipment and all that. Yeah, so it's really great. I'm so glad you brought that up to just sort of remind us all. Okay, at this point, I just want to ask that if you do have any questions for our panelists, we're still taking questions, so please do click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll be happy to answer the questions you may have. We'll move on to another question, and this comes from Mr. Rufus Ong, and he is asking, which was the hardest chapter to write?
I think everyone would say every chapter was hard.
Yeah.
Because we had to, tweak the book.
Yeah.
We had to refresh the book maybe at least 3 times, if I remember.
Yes.
Tim?
Three or four, I think.
3 or 4 times.
Okay. Yes. Maybe I'll just put you, Tim, on the spot here. Sorry about that. So because you wrote several chapters.
Yes.
You wrote the one on masks and you wrote the one on vaccination.
Yes.
Just based on the chapters that you wrote, which was the most difficult, and why?
Well, okay. First off, so I mean, as we mentioned, there were a lot of tweaks and changes, and due to that, actually, there were also some chapters that didn't make it into the book. Okay. There was one on prisons, which was, that was pretty hard to do. But out of those that did come in, I think the one on masks was pretty challenging because there was a lot of sensitive information at the time, right? You've got trade agreements, you've got countries that or territories that don't really want to be dragged into this, and no one really wants to be painted as the bad guy in the situation. But the truth is that at the time, many countries were just looking out for their own self-interests. So it was challenging trying to balance some of the sensitivities, I think, in this chapter, while telling as much of the story as possible. At the same time, it was just so hard to condense all the great stories. There were a lot of parts we had to cut out. Local mask making companies that really put their all into doing this. To condense that all into one chapter to fit in, it's very hard to do it justice, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
And Karam, actually, the book is not just text, of course, it's photographs.
Yeah.
And in the end, we probably used 10% of, this huge menu of photos that were available to us.
Yeah, I think photos are always a really good sort of tool or medium, because it really brings to life some of the challenges and some of the struggles people have faced. Okay, there's another question. This one comes again from Mr. Ong Wee Kyong, and he's asking, COVID-19 has highlighted several problems and issues in our society. What is the one problem or issue that you will continue to follow and report on in the years to come?
Well, for me, I think one big issue was home-based learning and the sort of inequalities this surfaced. Because we had quotes from people saying that teachers found out that there were students actually who didn't have a proper place to study at home. And they were actually out in the corridors trying to listen into a lesson. So this is definitely one area I think the Straits Times will continue to pursue. And also the other sort of inequalities that COVID surfaced.
I think the home-based learning is really a good one to talk about, because there are certain things that have come out of COVID that probably will be with us as more or less of a permanent feature, and I think home-based learning is one. I mean, even when the pandemic is over, I think that the Ministry of Education and schools will continue to want to push for this home-based learning, whether it's once every 2 weeks, whether it's once a month. Also as we move on to the whole digital way of teaching and learning and sort of doing everything else as well. So really good question there from Mr. Ong. Tim, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, certainly. I think aside from the inequalities, which was a big issue, mental health is something that a lot of people have been talking about thanks to COVID. Really, as a part of maybe the younger generation, I'm very passionate about mental health. And in a way, I mean, I'm not sure we can really say that, wow, COVID was a blessing in disguise, but at least one of the good things that came out of it was that now everybody is a lot more willing to have conversations about mental health, because that time during circuit breaker or during the heightened alerts, I think we all remember everyone was struggling. Everyone, whether you're a minister, you're a migrant worker, obviously struggling to different degrees, but everyone was struggling. And these are issues that are only going to worsen in our fast-paced society, and so I think I would really like to pursue this. We may have in the works a series on mental health coming up, so do look out for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that might well be our next webinar, or perhaps later on.
Can I give a plug?
Yes, in this year. We're just doing a plug for that right now. No, but just talking about mental health, Tim, there's also a government task force that's been set up, isn't there, on COVID-19, on mental health. Do you want to maybe tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so it was initially set up as the COVID-19 task force on mental health, and I think when they realized that, and I'm glad they realized that the problems to do with mental health would stretch beyond the pandemic, it was reorganized into, I think it was the interagency task force, and I mean, they've proposed several recommendations, and I do think that it's important to have these, brought up officially, by the government in Parliament as well, because we can have a lot of ground-up effort as well. But overall, I think Singapore as a society, when the government says, okay, we're going to do this, then everyone listens and starts moving as well. And I think that's very important. Yeah, so hopefully this continues and we make progress on this very, very important issue. Yeah,
I agree. So it's a bit of a top-down approach there, but I think in this case, if it works, then I think that's a really good step.
Together with the ground-up approaches that are already in place. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go into the final question. This comes from Miss Jane Sia. This is a question for Sumiko, and I think this is a question Tim and I and everyone else who was involved in the book also want to ask you. Will there be a part 2 of this book when the pandemic is over?
I don't think it's up to me. It's up to Karam and Tim and the rest of the newsroom. But we had to stop somewhere in the book, right? The project couldn't go on forever. So we decided to cut off around November. And we thought everything was fine, Christmas was coming, Delta was stabilizing. And then just as we were putting the book to bed, Omicron came, right? So we stopped at Omicron. We went to print in December. And as we all know, a lot of things have happened since Omicron. We could do a second book, I think, but it would have to be a different kind of book. It wouldn't be a book maybe so filled with photographs, maybe more a text kind of book. But like I said, it's not up to me, it's up to the newsroom.
Okay, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
Tim.
Right.
Okay, I had said that was the last question, but I'm just going to take another one here that just came in. This one has no name. It just says ST Reader, and it's a question specifically for Tim. What was your personal takeaway about the Singapore Social Compact being at the front line of reporting? So I think this maybe goes beyond the book and just generally, the reporting that you've done in the last 2 years as a key member of the, ST Covid-19 team.
Well, thanks for the question. I'm not too sure what you mean by Singapore Social Compact. I assume that you mean sort of the relationship between Singaporeans in the society as a whole, as well as with the authorities.
That's right.
I'd say Singapore is, on the whole, what I would call a very high-trust society. And that means that when the authorities say something, yes, as Singaporeans, we love to complain. I love to complain. But essentially, we generally do trust what the government or what the ministries are saying. And that is only because of, a history of trust being built up between government and the people. And I think that has helped us tremendously in fighting this pandemic. When we were speaking to the co-chairs, they were saying, honestly, we are quite fortunate that we have this relationship because if not, then, well, we could be seeing, you look at other countries, you see protests happening, you see people going out defying orders, spreading the virus everywhere. We'll be in a very, very different situation right now. We might not even be sitting here talking with our masks off, And among the people as well, I think, at the start, the pandemic brought out the ugliest in everybody, everywhere around the world. There was some xenophobia that came out. There were some ugly sentiments, tensions that boiled over. But as a whole, I think Singapore recovered from these quickly. And I think what's important is that we are willing to now, the populace as a whole has expressed this willingness to have these conversations, to talk about these issues, and to deal with them and come out stronger from this pandemic. So, I mean, honestly, looking around the world, I'm quite proud to be a Singaporean, seeing how things have gone. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tim. Right, so thank you again for all your questions. And I think that's about as much time as we have for questions. Perhaps a parting shot from our panelists, just very briefly, just tell us what's the one thing that really surprised you, or just stuck to your mind, or something really unforgettable as you worked on this project.
Okay. For me, it wasn't so much about the book project per se, but this whole 2 years of the pandemic, it really struck me that, human beings are really adaptable creatures. Whoever would have thought that, we can do this and speak to, readers like this, digitally, virtually. Whoever thought that we could produce newspapers remotely from home. And whoever thought that we could produce a book, a 352 or 53-page book, virtually done. Remotely. So that was one thing that really surprised me.
Yeah, so brought up the best in everyone, including all of us here in the newsroom, if I may say so myself. Tim, parting shot from you?
My example's a little different from Sumiko's. I think it was when we were speaking with Permsec Gabriel Lim, who's with MTI, and we were talking to him about the panic buying. I think we all remember those days.
Toilet paper rolls.
Yes. And on the subject of toilet paper rolls, we asked him, jokingly we asked him, how much toilet paper do we have left in Singapore, right? And he told us 1 to 2 days at the peak of the panic buying, we only had that much left. And that really stuck with me. I mean, first of all, because everyone was joking about it at the time, but the situation behind the scenes was really quite serious. And I think this sort of highlighted, it's a good example, and there are many of these other examples in the book, of just how close we could have come to disaster and how we managed to avert that only through the hard work of everybody, not just the authorities, not just frontline workers and all who have contributed a lot, but as a society as well. And from that, just working on this book has taught me that all of us, minister, migrant worker, businessman, hawker, we're all just humans trying to get through this pandemic together, and I think that's really stuck with me.
Okay, so on that really serious note, I really want to thank you, Sumiko and Tim, for being with us. And thank you so much, our audience, for joining us today. In This Together, Singapore's COVID-19 story is available at bookstores and at stbooks.sg. And for more on the book, do visit the website below. And please look out for a series of 6 podcasts based on the book. They will be released from March till July and will be helmed by Sumiko, Tim, and our senior health correspondent, Joyce Teo. A recording of this webinar will be available on the Straits Times website later today. Stay informed and stay safe.